Hi, it's Mark from 109 Training, and welcome to this first in a series of videos that I'm putting together to describe how to make flight planning simple. And in this video we're going to talk through how to plan a single leg and complete a VFR plug. Now there's multiple ways of doing this, and if you come into this as a student completing your PPL and you've picked up the various different textbooks that are out there, you'll have seen already that there's many different ways of planning a route. And similarly, if you speak to different instructors, then different instructors will tell you that their way is best. I'm not saying my way is best. My way is simple, and what I do is spend quite a bit of time on the ground planning, and I use the technique which then makes it nice and simple when I'm in the air to determine what I need to do to correct my heading and to determine whether I'm on time to reach my destination. So I'm going to talk you through step by step how I would go about doing that. So what we're going to do is have a look at how we plan this single leg, and we're going to depart Leeds Bradford Airport and route towards the VRP at Eckert Reservoir, and then we're going to plan the route going northeast past Wetherby, York and up to Malton. So the first thing we do is draw a straight line on the chart using a ruler between the 2 points. And this is the VFR plug that we're going to complete during this planning exercise, and it's a fairly standard one. There's various versions out there with slight different tweaks on them, but most of them have all of these columns in them, and they all tend to be in this order because it's a fairly logical order to complete them. So the first thing we're going to do is, before I start doing any further planning, I'm going to draw the wind onto my chart, and as well as writing it on, I also put a big wind arrow on that's really obvious. If I'm flying a big route, I might put it in multiple places on the chart, just so at any point in time when I'm in the air, I can have a quick glance at the wind arrow and just refresh myself which direction the wind's coming from, and I can then visualize that compared to my heading, just to determine what I'm expecting to happen in terms of drift and in terms of ground speed. And so the ultimate aim of this exercise really is to fly from Eckert to Malton, and I want to plan a time and fly accurately and reach Malton at the time that I've planned, to within a few minutes. And so this is around about a 30-minute leg. So what I'm going to do is break this leg down, because if I don't break it down, I'm not going to be able to determine whether I'm going to reach it on time until literally a few minutes before reaching Malton. And what I want to be able to do in the air fairly quickly is to determine whether the forecast wind is correct and whether I'm going to reach my my destination at the time that I'm expecting that to happen. So all we do is break the route down into quarters. And the technique that I use is to break it down into equal distances. It doesn't have to be exactly equal. So if you're flying through an area where there's nothing there that you would be able to reference in the air, but a couple of miles further down there is something, then I would put my my waypoint at that point where there's something on the ground. Because ultimately what we're wanting to do is, when we're in the air, is look at the chart, look where we are compared to the ground, and determine whether we're on track and whether we're on time. So we need something to be able to reference to do that. So this is I've set these almost exactly equal, and this has worked out quite well. My first waypoint is going to be just after Wetherby Racecourse. So Wetherby Racecourse is a really nice obvious feature that you can see from the air. So I'm going to be expecting to fly over the top of it and just past it, and that's when I'm going to check my time. I've then got this point when I'm going to be crossing the River Ouse, and I'm just to the northwest of this built-up area here, which I'm confident I'm going to be able to see, as well as a split in the river. This third point, again, I've got where the main road turns into a dual carriageway. So just after that, I'm going to see a railway track and I'm going to see a river. So again, I'm fairly confident I should be able to see that. And I'm going to be just approaching that when I do that. Equally, I guess arguably I could just move that point a tiny bit further so it's exactly there, or even just crossing the river there. But for the purpose of this, I'm going to leave it there. And then I'm going to add some drift line. So this is where opinion splits, I think, across the instructor community, whether this is the way to plan or not. This is the way I use, because as I say, I think by using this method, and I'll show you in another video how you use this method to determine whether you're on track in the air and how to correct if you're not. I think it's just a really, really simple method that allows you to determine if you're on track, and if you're not, by how much you have to correct, without having to work out any complex maths in there, trying to divide the number by 60 in your head, which I think most people would find a bit of a struggle. So certainly I do. So what I do is I pick 10 degrees either side of track, and I draw a line coming from the destination and from the departure point, sorry, and coming from the destination. And so that's 10 degrees either side of track there. So let's have a go at completing this the VFR flight log. So we're flying from Ekup, and we're flying to Malton on this leg. So the next thing it asks us to do is determine our safety altitude. And again, if you look in the textbooks, there's multiple ways of doing this, and there's even multiple descriptions of what this actually means in terms of VFR flying. As you might guess, I use a nice simple method to determine this. So what I do is I get my thumb out, and I use the tip of my thumb to my first knuckle to determine what 5 miles either side of track is, and then I work my thumb along and I look to see what obstacles there are, whether there's obstacles or whether there's terrain. So as I'm coming out of Leeds, I may well be departing to the south, and so I could be coming around this way here. So we've got the obstacles here at what, 649 feet, so they're quite high, and then I'm going to come on track, and actually I'm flying across the Vale of York. So Vale of York's really quite flat, so there's no real obstacles or terrain for me to worry about too much as I'm working my way across the Vale of York. But then as I come up to the northeast, there's some terrain here. So the highest point within 5 miles either side of track is this terrain here, which is 778 feet. So I'm going to round that up to 800 feet, and I'm going to add 1,000, and so that's what I'm going to class as my safe altitude. In terms of my planned altitude, the day we're going to fly this, let's say it's a nice sunny bright day, cav okay, I don't have any restrictions on airspace once I get clear of the controlled airspace at Leeds. So I'm going to plan this route at 3,000 feet. It's a nice altitude where we can see lots of things. It gives us a bit of a safety margin, but we're not climbing too high unnecessarily. So I'm going to plan it at 3,000 feet. I'm going to be flying it, my true airspeed is going to be 100 knots. Next, we need to determine what our track is going to be, our true track. And the way we do that is to get our protractor out and to measure this nice and accurately, bob it halfway down the line. And this isn't perfectly accurate just because of how PowerPoint works, but line up the edge of the protractor with the line there, and then we're looking for our track to determine what that is. And so if we look carefully, if I was to measure that carefully and properly, I would see that my track is 059, my true track. We already know what our wind velocity is because we've already popped that on the map, so that's 020, so it's coming from 020, remember, at 15 knots. So then now we need to do some calculations to determine what our heading is and what our ground speed is, and then once we have our ground speed, we can determine how long it's going to take us. So again, another split here in terms of different advice. So traditionally, people have used the good old whiz wheel and deter the CRP or a variance of that, and which you can absolutely use to calculate these next few columns. The UKCA are now allowing us to use digital flight planning computers at long last, and so I'm a huge fan of doing this, and I think it keeps things, again, surprise surprise, much more simple, and it avoids errors, because I think if you don't use the whiz wheel really regularly, I think you can get, fairly quickly you can get out currency with it. And I see lots of students scratching their heads fiddling with the wheel because they've not used it for a few weeks. The digital flight computer, much more intuitive. So the one I like is this one, is the CX3. So they're a little bit pricey, arguably. So is the CRP for what it is. But actually, if you have a look on their website, there's an online version of it that you can use to calculate what you need to do. And again, have a shop around. There's multiple versions of this, but this is the one that I use, and this is the one that I'm going to use in this video. So essentially, we plonk in what our course is, what our wind speed is and wind direction, and what our TAS is, and then it calculates the other parameters for us. So we can see by doing that, our true heading is 054. And let's just sense check that. So as I work my way through this, and I think that's one of the criticisms that people have of using a flight computer rather than the whiz wheel, is it doesn't allow you to visualize it. I would always do this anyway, just to double check in my head or scribble it on a bit of paper. So I'm my track is 059. I can see the winds coming from the right and from the front, so I'm expecting it to push me to the right. So in order to correct for that, I'm going to have to reduce my heading. So I'm expecting the heading to have reduced a little bit. And surprise, surprise, it has. It's 054. And again, in another video, I'll talk you through how to use mental dead reckoning to just roughly calculate that in your head, so you know roughly what sort of number to expect. So at the moment, we're lucky in this area of the UK that the magnetic variation is 0. So our true heading and our magnetic heading are exactly the same. So 054. We then need to calculate our ground speed. Again, back to my CX3, I can see it's calculated my ground speed at 88 knots. And again, quick sense check of that, as we've already said. We had the wind's on the nose at 15 knots, so I'm expecting my ground speed to be less than my true airspeed. So to do that, we get our ruler out, and it might seem an obvious thing to say, but just make sure you're using the right scale. So aeronautical rulers tend to have different scales on, as this one does, depending which scale of chart you're using. So we're using a 1/2 mil chart here, so just make sure that you're using the 1/2 mil chart side, and we can see that that's 31 nautical miles. And then I want to calculate my time. So back to that, back to my CX3, and we can see on the CX3 it's taken just over 21 minutes. So again, just a quick sense check. So I know I'm doing 88 knots, so we're just under 1.5 miles a minute. So 31 divided by 1.5 is just over 20. So I'm expecting it to be around 21 minutes, and so that's what it is. Okay, so so we're happy with that. And then the last two boxes we're going to complete in the air. So we can absolutely say, right, we've booked the airplane and we're going to get airborne and we're going to hit ECUP at 12 o'clock. The odds of that happening are pretty slim. I don't think I've ever managed to do that. So what I do is complete these when I'm in the air. So if I get to ECUP, I get to and I look at my watch, it's 12 o'clock. I then update my ETA to be 12:21. And as we've said a few times, the method that we're using to plan this route is to enable us to determine whether we're on track and whether we're on time. And so we've broken this flight, this leg down into these 4 sectors. So what we're going to do just now is calculate how long it's going to take us to get to each of those waypoints. So once again, I'm going to get my CX3 out and I'm just going to calculate those. So I'm expecting 5:30, 10:55 and 16:20. So that's our planning completed. The last two things that I add on, or tend to add on, if there's space on the chart and the chart's not too busy for places to be able to write, is I write my safety altitude on. So again, just a quick glance, I can look what that is. And then I just have a little arrow template that I draw on, and then I write my heading on there as well. So ultimately, by just glancing at my chart, I've got everything I need to be able to navigate from ECUP to Malton just by looking at the chart. And then I use the VFR PLOG as kind of a backup and to just update as I work my way around. So just before we finish up, just a few final kind of tips. to make this as useful as it can be. So biggest one is take your time. I really, particularly if I'm flying somewhere that I'm unfamiliar, I spend ages planning. I think every minute spent on the ground planning is absolutely pays dividends once you're in the air, particularly studying things such as airspace, terrain and obstacles. So airspace being the biggie, in terms of you don't want to be infringing any airspace. So it's not just about that lateral separation from airspace, it's checking there's nothing above you that's going to cause you any problems. And then just use other tools that are out there in order to make life easier. Obviously, if you're flying to another airfield, we need to be looking at the plates for that airfield. So look, you can look those up in the AIP, or you may have a paid license for some things to be able to look them up somewhere else. Obviously, check our NOTAMs and check our weather. And then another thing that I find really useful, again, particularly if I'm flying somewhere new, and if I'm trying to find a small little airfield in particular, then I'll use Google Earth. So I get Google Earth out, and then I can just visualize what I'm expecting to see. So an example of where this might be useful, for instance, is on our route we're flying past a disused airfield called Eastmoor. So North Yorkshire is full of disused airfields. So if I was using that as a waypoint, for example, I would absolutely have a quick look at that on Google Earth just to see what that looks like, so that I'm definitely happy that I'm turning at the right disused airfield. And you can see on Google Earth there that that's, you know, it's quite a distinctive shape with some things around it. I guess the only caveat I think you've got to be careful about is Google Earth might be a couple of years out of date, and actually on Google Earth you can see when the image was taken. So I guess that's just one thing to be careful about. So I hope that's been useful, and by all means add any comments, questions in the box below, and I'll get back to you and try and answer any queries that you have. And as I say, this is the first of a series of videos, so I'm going to be putting some more together to demonstrate how to make life easy when we're planning a route, and how to actually use that once we're in the air. So thanks for watching.